Yep. So, you just want me? You just want me to refer to what's on that list? What's going on here? What's going on?
To CripChat,
Just trying to
your
work
weekly
out what's going on
podcast.
here. Do you just want me
Hello.
to talk about what's on the list for chapter one?
Yes. We're just gonna do an introduction. David, go ahead.
Okay. Do you want to start it again? Do the thing again.
No, no,
Start it again.
just continue on, David.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to CripChat, your weekly podcast for everything disability. Today, I'm with me, Jonathan Shah,
Uh,
EPD, and myself, David D. We're talking to Peter Gregory about navigating the NDIS form bill. Well, the
nah,
NDIS.
good stuff. Thank you very much for that, David. Yeah, welcome everyone. Welcome to CripChat, your weekly podcast on everything disability. Welcome to Peter. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you, Abby?
How's it going,
Yeah,
Peter?
good. All good.
Nah,
Yeah.
all good. Thank you very much for being on the show. So, look, just a bit of introduction. So, we're really talking about the NDIS reform bill and its implications for home and living supports for individuals with disability. And we'll be hearing from Peter himself on the emphasis of the importance of safeguarding human rights, including the right to live independently and in the community. So, moving on to segment one, so a bit of understanding of the NDIS reform bill. So, Peter, what are the key provisions of the NDIS reform bill related to home and living supports?
Um, so you guys probably are aware that this bill is the first of a number of changes that the government is proposing. And this bill is the first, and it's like the legislation that they want to put in place to lay the foundation for other changes that they want to make. So, um,
Oh,
and
interesting.
and it's legislation that is seeking to implement the recommendations from the NDIS review. And as you're probably aware, the government and the NDIA haven't yet released any statement about how they're going to respond to the review, but they've gone ahead and developed some legislation. So that's the first issue. That's a bit of a problem. Um, it's like they've jumped the gun, decided that we're going to implement the review, not engaged in the co-design that they promised, and haven't released
Yep.
any response to the NDIS review to say this is what we think about it, this is how we propose to proceed, and this is how we propose to co-design the the solutions. So that's just a kind of broad introduction. The and it's very core.
Oh, so
But yeah,
yeah.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Hmm.
Peter. So so
No,
so
I'm just saying, thank you for the brief introduction.
Yeah.
Peter, it
Yeah,
it
David, do you have a
sounds like
question?
they're dictating to us what we need.
Well, David, the way the bill is structured, like I said, it lays a foundation. So there are a few things in there that we need to be worried about. So the first thing is that they are proposing a change in the definition of an NDIS support. So currently NDIS
Yes.
supports are decided based on reasonable and necessary principles. Well, this legislation proposes that they change the definition. Essentially, it throws out what we understand about reasonable and necessary support and replaces it with a definition that allows them to decide what will be a support and what won't be a support. So what's an approved support and what's not an approved support. What was very controversial about the NDIS support definition is that in the bill that they put up, they took some words from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and then said this new definition is in line with the UN CRPD when it wasn't. And the new definition is very narrow and, as I said before, enables them to say these are the supports that you can have and these are the supports that you can't have.
So
So
you
that's,
made it limited.
yeah, correct. So, for example, they've said that you won't be able to buy electrical equipment with your NDIS funds. But as you're probably aware, there are many people who find devices like the Thermomix a really good solution because it means that they can prepare meals without having to pay a support worker to come in. So it's just one of those statements that shows that when you try and put boundaries around what you can say as a support and what you can't, you'll always come up with something that's not quite right. So my first point is that the bill talks about this thing called an NDIS support, and it's problematic. Now the second thing is that what they're saying is that everybody will have a needs assessment, and how that needs assessment is established and set up hasn't been decided yet. So this bill says, how about you agree to a needs assessment that doesn't exist yet? Well, that's a bit of a problem. When a government is saying, trust us, we'll do the right thing, and we'll assess your needs using a mechanism that we haven't yet determined. Now they say that needs assessment mechanism will be co-designed with people with disabilities, but I'm personally just a little bit skeptical about that because the bill wasn't co-designed with people with disabilities. You guys weren't involved in the discussion about the bill. So I'm a bit skeptical when people say we'll co-design, but there hasn't been any real evidence of it. So that's the first thing you need to know. This thing called the needs assessment, and then the needs assessment will be used to calculate a budget. And the way in which the budget is calculated hasn't been designed yet either.
Okay,
the needs assessment mechanism hasn't been designed, and the budget hasn't been designed yet. But
so it's practically digging a hole and not knowing how deep you want to dig. That's
right. So you're kind of getting the idea there, David. It's like we'll assess you, but we're not going to tell you how we're going to assess you. And remember, that's what they did in independent assessments. We've been through all of this before. And then we'll decide how the budget's going to be calculated on that assessment, but it hasn't been designed yet. Now, within the detail about both of those things, the needs assessment and the budget calculation tool that comes up with the total budget, There are requirements on the minister when the mechanism for designing the needs assessment and the mechanism for designing the budget is done. He has to take into consideration the viability of the scheme. And lots of people say, well, what does that mean? What does it mean when you take into consideration the viability of the scheme? And both of those things combined together lead to the development of what's in the bill is called the participant statement of supports. So the needs assessment joined up with the budget becomes the participant statement of supports. Now, here's the cruncher. Because the needs assessment profit is a mechanism that is enshrined in legislation. So you kind of get what I mean there. Enshrined it in legislation means it becomes fixed. And because the budget mechanism is also going to be enshrined in legislation,
So it's gonna help the government spend less.
Correct. And David, neither of those decisions will be reviewable. So you won't be able to say, I disagree with the way in which you put together my needs assessment.
Just a sec. Ibby, can you mute?
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
You won't be able to say, I disagree.
Sorry about that, Peter, go ahead.
You won't be able to say, I disagree with the way in which you put together my needs assessment. And you won't be able to say, I disagree with how you've gone about calculating my budget.
Yeah.
The only decision, no. You know now, if the NDIA makes a decision that you don't agree with, like the number of hours of support, and you think that the hours of support should be higher, you can ask for a review, and if you don't get the answer that you want, you can go to the AAT. With these decisions, you won't be able to get them reviewed. The only thing you can get reviewed is the decision of the CEO of the NDIA to agree to the participant statement of support. That's the only thing.
So it's a dictatorship.
Well, what it enables them to do, David, is decide what makes up the needs assessment and how the budget is calculated. Now, so I've mentioned two things already. I've mentioned the NDIS supports definition, and I've mentioned the participant statement of supports. That includes the needs assessment and the budget. Now, the third thing that's really important is that the budget allows the minister and the NDIA to decide on classes of participants. So the legislation sets up this thing called a class of participant and a class of funding. So a class of participant could be people with autism, for example, and therefore they could say with these needs assessments that a class of participants with autism would have a needs assessment that looks like this, and a class of participants with cerebral palsy would have a needs assessment like this. So if you remember the old independent assessment days, what they were proposing was that they would set up things they called personas, and the personas were descriptions of different groups of people with disabilities, and to those different groups of people with disabilities, they intended to assign an amount of money that we usually allocate to that group of people. So this is the risk that we face when they are wanting to set up definitions of classes of participants.
Because people, some people can have multiple disabilities than just one.
Yeah, and not all people with disabilities are the same. And if you say there's a class of participants, you're saying this group of people, say with cerebral palsy, for example, are all the same. That's just not that's not the case, is it? In any shape or form.
Everyone's got different severities and different disabilities.
Different disabilities. It presents in different ways. People live in different circumstances. They live in different locations. All of those things mean that you really need to be assessing the needs of an individual based on their individual circumstances. What this enables them to do is say, here's a group of people to whom we're just going to allocate this amount of money. Now, I think you've been told that I spend a lot of my time with people who are regarded as complex and people who receive full-time support, 24/7 support. So what I'm worried about, and you would probably have heard that one of the recommendations from the NDIS review is that people receiving 24/7 support should have their funding limited to the financial equivalent of 1 to 3 shared support. Have you heard that spoken about? Yeah, the 1 to 3 shared support is a recommendation from the review, and that ratio of support, the review says, should be applied to people requiring 24/7 support. So, with the mechanisms that I've just spoken about, what I'm worried about is it would be possible for the NDIA to say that there's a class of participants who require 24/7 support, and that class of participants should be allocated funding based on a 1 to 3 ratio. So you can see where it goes. Or they might say there's a class of participants called category 3 autistics, and that those people we would normally allocate this bunch of supports to. That could happen. So that this becomes a problem. Now, the point that I'd make finally is the current NDIS definition of reasonable and necessary supports enables us to argue for any support, provided that support satisfies the principles of reasonable and necessary. It needs to be in line with your goals. It needs to be value for money. It needs to be able to demonstrate outcomes for the individual. It's a support that normally wouldn't be provided, say, by the health system, for example. It's a support that wouldn't normally be provided by informal supports, that sort of stuff. So the current definition of reasonable and necessary really enables us to argue, person by person, what is the right support for them. And if the agency disagrees, then we can ask for a review. And if that review doesn't come back favourable, then we can go to the AAT.
So
there are some other bits and pieces in there, but maybe I'll just leave it there at the moment, because in relation to home and living, they're kind of the things that are significant.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Now, thank you for that. Thank you. Very insightful. Thank you for sharing that, Peter. We'll move on to our next segment. So, perspectives from the disability community. Peter, can you share personal experiences or stories highlighting the importance of living independently in the community?
Well, Ibby, I'm an old guy. I'm an old hippie. I've got a ponytail. So I've been around since the 1970s when we started getting people out of institutions. So, for 50 years, I've been spending my time with people to get them out of, those big institutions, those big horrible things, but also
Yes.
getting them out of group homes and places like that. And look, and you guys will know this yourselves from the lives that you lead. I can say without a doubt that when we work with people to get them out of group homes and design the supports around them that are tailored to their particular needs and their particular requirements, and ensure that they have the people around them, support people around them who are focused on providing supports on their terms, the outcomes are astonishing. That they're amazing, without exception. When we do that, people live really, really good lives. That doesn't mean, and I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. That doesn't mean that things are necessarily easy, but it does mean that people are deciding who comes into their lives and they're deciding how the money is spent. As opposed to when you're in a group home, you're sharing support with other people. Your life revolves around what other people in the group home are doing. Usually, if there's somebody in the group home who's quite disruptive, then your entire life is controlled by the needs of somebody who can get upset. And I'm not saying this because I'm blaming people for getting upset. People express their frustration and annoyance in a whole variety of ways. But what I am saying is when you're forced into group homes, when you're forced to live with other people, your life is not your own. And lots of people want to tell me that that's just not the case. Well, I've been around doing this since the early 70s, and I can say categorically that if you're trapped in a group home, your life is controlled by the system and you don't get control yourself. Whereas when we work with people to build something that's really unique to them, the outcomes are amazing. And I can talk about some of that stuff. What do we see? We see people get out and about a lot more. They've got a lot more friends in their lives. They are choosing who provides them with support. They are involved in deciding where they go and what they do. They don't have to ask permission. I did an interview with a friend of mine the other day, and she said, as an example, I wanted to go to a Pink concert, and I decided to go to 2 Pink concerts, and I didn't have to ask anybody's permission. That's the kind of bottom line.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. It gives them that sense of freedom,
That's right.
And it's amazing.
See, like when you do the group homes, everyone's got to eat the same thing. Everyone's got to eat what they choose, not what you choose.
Yep. And people will say, "Oh, we can get around that."
Exactly.
But what I know is that over time, it just defaults to the lowest common denominator. It just goes back to what's easiest for the support workers.
And what's the cheapest?
What's the cheapest? What's the easiest for people? It's just I can't emphasize enough that in the lives of the people who I spend time with, the people who have something really individual to them, they're living far superior lives.
And you can tell, the difference it creates. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It is. It
Thank you
really
very
is.
much for that, Peter.
No problem.
Awesome. So we'll now move on to our next segment. Thank you very much for sharing,
Segment
Peter.
3.
Awesome. Segment 3, so assessing human rights implications. And so, Peter, do you
Well,
believe that the NDIS reform bill? Sorry.
yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I'll finish the question. So I'll
Yeah.
read the question, Peter. Do you believe that the NDIS reform bill, as currently proposed, adequately upholds the human rights of individuals with disabilities, particularly in relation to home and living arrangements?
No, not at all. Not at all. So, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is quite long and involved, but there are some aspects of that bill that are very, very relevant to the home and living framework. And the section of the UN CRPD that people often talk to is Article 19. And Article 19 essentially says, as a person with a disability, you have a right to live where you choose, with who you choose, and to be supported by who you choose. That's the kind of bring it down to the basics. This bill does not guarantee that participants will be able to exercise those rights because of the way in which it has been built. And I'll go back to the examples that I've given. The way in which an NDIS support has been defined will mean that a politician or a bureaucrat will decide what is a support and what isn't a support. A system that you can't challenge will decide what your support needs are, and a mechanism that you can't challenge will decide what the budget is. And the way in which those things are structured could easily mean that there is a definition, for example, that it is appropriate for people requiring 24/7 support to be allocated funding based on a shared support ratio, which really means that the NDIA is saying that those people should be living in group homes. Now, there are people who throw up their arms like this and say, that's not right. We're just talking about funding. But I know as a matter of fact, when you say that somebody's funding is based on shared support, that always, or very nearly always, means that they get pushed into a group home. And when you get pushed into a group home with people who you don't know, with people who you don't choose to live with, it can only lead to one outcome, and it's not pleasant. And I've seen it time and time again. So this bill fundamentally does not guarantee the rights of people with disabilities as they are defined by the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities.
So it'll be chaos that way.
Yeah.
Because there's no choice there. And people hate their lives.
It provides real limitations. Now, I just add that last week or week before, I've lost track of time now. A number of us appeared before the Senate inquiry looking at that's investigating the bill. And during that Senate inquiry, the Department of Social Services bureaucrats said that they had made a change to the definition of an NDIS support and now agreed that an NDIS support must conform to the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. So that sounds good on the surface. Yep, seems as though we're heading in the right direction. However, and we are.
But
it's taking us in the right direction.
It's their definition. That's the thing.
That's the first thing, David. Spot on. It's how they interpret it. Secondly, it only applies to the supports that they believe, or only applies to the support that they say we're going to approve. So that doesn't mean that they are looking at support based on what the people require, looking at all the possibilities and all those possibilities conforming to the UNCRPD. They're saying when we decide what a support will be, it should conform to the convention. And then what David said is correct. It's then what their interpretation of the convention is, particularly
Peter,
the UNCRPD. Yeah, sorry, David.
Can I have my what my thoughts are?
Yeah,
this sounds like a dictator. This sounds like a dictatorship. Dictatorship, not a support. They tell us what we need.
Mechanism.
What we need.
And David, that's what a lot of people are saying. They're saying the same thing.
No.
So when you ask,
that,
when you ask what are the worries of people, that's one of the things that people are being told. This is what you can have, and this is what you can't have, based on what a politician or a bureaucrat thinks. That's what they're worried about.
Yeah, and I agree.
We should ask.
Thank you for that, Peter.
We should ask them to have a look at what they've put onto us, and if they can take our instructions of what they can do and what they can't do, if they would like that.
So David, the Minister and the NDIA and Department of Social Services have said that any changes will be designed with people with disabilities, but they haven't yet given us an outline of how that design work with people with disabilities will happen. But what we do have is a bill that's been developed without consultation with people with disabilities. We do have an NDIS review that has been developed we have an NDIS review that has recommendations that haven't been designed with people with disabilities. And based on the NDIS review's own information, they only consulted with 1,000 people with disabilities. So I guess the point that I'm making is the bureaucrats and the politicians talk about designing the solutions with people with disabilities, but we're just not seeing it. Yeah. And you know, there's been big controversy. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just saying, thanks for that, Peter. Yeah, I agree.
And you know that there's been big controversy about the NDIS review saying that everybody should use registered providers, and people saying no. If we're forced to use registered providers, we'll lose the support workers that we have. If we're forced to use registered providers, we'll get pushed back into the system that we've tried to escape from. So there's been a lot of argy-bargy about that recommendation. I don't know whether you guys got to participate in any of the forums about the registration. Jonathan, did you? Did you get to participate? Yeah, Jonathan. I'm pretty sure I've seen you on some of the forums.
Yeah.
Ibby, you did?
Yeah.
Did I? I'm not sure.
I think I've been to year one.
It would have been with a lawyer by the name of Natalie Wade. If you participated in a forum with Natalie Wade, you would have participated in a discussion with her about whether or not being told you have to use registered providers is a good idea.
The name sounds familiar. No, but yeah, thank you for that,
No
Peter.
problem.
Peter, in your opinion, does the potential restriction of choice and control of living arrangements constitute a breach of human rights, including the right to freedom from discrimination and the right to live independently?
I think this bill lays the foundation for the NDIA to significantly impact the rights of people with disabilities, because it, I said right at the beginning, it's like the first bill. It's like the foundation upon which they can build other things.
Peter, it sounds like it's restricting us.
Yes, I believe that this bill limits the opportunities for people to get the full range of supports that they require to live the life that they want, and including the principle of choice and control, and leading to opportunities for social and economic participation.
Okay, Peter, do you think they did this so they can limit the people that can apply for the NDIS?
If you look at how this bill is constructed, one of the conclusions that you can reach is that the intention of this bill is to reduce the cost of the NDIS by reducing the number of people who can access the scheme, and to reduce the value of people's plans. That's one of the conclusions that you can come to. Now, they say that they're introducing this because it provides more flexibility. They're introducing this because it makes the definition of access more straightforward. However, when they're talking about flexibility, what they're actually talking about is you being able to take your personal budget and use it to pay for your in-home supports, your community participation supports, and your therapy supports out of one bucket of money. However, they are going to decide which of those supports you can have and which you can't. If you require 24/7 support, the support associated with your in-home supports won't be flexible. It'll be controlled. It's called a stated support, which means it's controlled. So the idea of flexibility isn't as accurate as what we would be led to believe. That's what they say. They say it gives more flexibility. It makes it clearer who can apply for the scheme and who can't. Those sorts of things.
Okay.
And David, the reason why I say it has the potential to infringe fundamental human rights is that when you line up this bill with the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, you can see easily, I think, from my perspective, you can see easily that a number of the articles that underpin the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities can be limited or impacted by this bill and any subsequent bills that come out of it.
Thank you for that, Peter.
Do you want me to expand on that a little bit more, or you're right?
Yeah. Can you please expand?
Okay. So don't you, that when we talk about home and living, it includes the direct support that you receive in home, the personal care that you receive. That's one bit. It also includes home modification. It also includes short-term accommodation, or what used to be called respite. It also includes medium-term accommodation for people who need accommodation if they're transitioning from hospital, for example, and it includes specialist disability accommodation. Now, when we look at all of those, the way in which this bill is structured and what could follow from this bill could mean that not only are there limitations about how you can purchase your personal care supports, they could also control short-term accommodation and what is acceptable for short-term accommodation and what isn't. You may also be aware that there is a recommendation to remove one of the categories from specialist disability accommodation. This would give them the capacity to do that. And that item, that category that they want to remove from specialist disability accommodation is called improved livability. And it's the category that people use when they don't have a physical disability, but it is really difficult for them to find accommodation on the open market or in public housing or in the rental scheme. Improved livability is the category that those people use. And generally that would be people with significant autism, for example, who find it really difficult to get somewhere on the rental market because they need a place that's really unique to them. As an example, it also applies to people with a psychosocial disability. Many of those people use the improved livability category. And there is a recommendation that category be removed. Now, it's not in the legislation, but this legislation provides a mechanism for that to occur.
No, cool, interesting. Thank you, Peter. We'll
No
move on
problem.
to our next segment, so segment 4, and we'll talk about legal and advocacy perspectives. So, Peter, from a legal standpoint, what are the implications of the NDIS reform bill for the human rights of individuals with disabilities? So, especially concerning institutionalization and community living.
I think when the lawyers talk about this bill, they say that it's got problems. They say that the way in which it's structured means that it could be challenged. That the laws that it creates are laws that could be challenged as not appropriate or acceptable. And in particular, people are worried about the definition of an NDIS support. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak to the law to a significant degree. But what I do know is that some of the practices of the NDIA, like saying that if you require 24/7 support, we're going to fund you based on shared support. Some of those practices that the NDIA does now, under this legislation and subsequent legislation, that could become law. And if that becomes law, then that is definitely an infringement on our understanding of the United Nations Convention on the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you for that, Peter. Also, continue.
So the reason that I say that is that it is generally accepted, isn't it, that the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities says I get to choose where I live, who I live with, and who supports me. If you have a law that says, no, we're going to decide that your funding is based on shared support, and therefore the only option that you have in practical terms is to live in a co-tenancy, then that's an infringement of that convention. It's pretty straightforward to me.
Yeah.
People will argue, no, we're not telling you you have to live in a group home, we're just telling you the amount of money. I say that's bollocks. That's not how it works.
Thanks for clarifying, Peter.
No problem, maybe.
So what advocacy efforts are underway to ensure that the NDIS reform bill aligns with international human rights standards and promotes the the principles of autonomy, inclusion, and equality.
So you guys have been involved in some of this advocacy yourselves, because I've seen Jonathan speaking out and so on. But so what people have been doing, firstly, people appeared before the Senate inquiry that is reviewing this bill, and many of your peers with disabilities made very strong cases about why this bill is inappropriate and will significantly limit their opportunities. So that's one. You know that the bill got presented to Parliament yesterday and was debated, and a whole lot of people all around Australia have been working together to provide information to politicians about why it's harmful. So right now, if your members of CripChat want to do something to aid that campaign, they can be writing or contacting their local member, telling them what their concerns are about this bill and asking them not to vote for it. And saying that we were all promised that any changes to the NDIS would be designed with people with disabilities, and that's what you expect to happen. So you could do that.
I think we should write up a actual document where people can put their names on it, and it's already written out for them, and to send to their local member.
So if you look at sites like Every Australian Counts, they've been putting out posts around what the primary concerns with the bill are. You could use that information as the basis for informing your members about how they could raise concerns. But what's really good is people talk about their personal stories. People who are saying clearly that if this bill goes ahead, I will lose my right to live where I want and to be supported by who I want.
That's good stuff. Thank you for that. We'll move on to our final segment. That's strategies for resistance and advocacy.
Segment 5.
Segment 5. So, Peter, what strategies can individuals with disabilities and their allies employ to resist potential arrangements on their human rights under the NDIS reform bill?
Okay, you want my big answer to that is we have to insist that the primary focus of the NDIS is building the skills and knowledge and confidence of NDIS participants to manage their own supports. We have to be insisting that that is the objective, one of the primary objectives, and therefore we should be insisting that the NDIS ensures that there is suitable funding within communities where people are living, so that there are independent people with the skills to work with individuals around building their skills to manage their own supports. The only way that we blow apart this shit show that we have now is by people learning how to take control of their own circumstances, by feeling confident, by knowing the strategies, um, the sorts of things that I'm sure you're aware of. How do I go about employing my own support workers? What do I need to consider? How do I monitor my budget? How do I negotiate with service providers? Those sorts of. So that's my big answer, Ibby. The much more controlled
And I agree. I completely agree with you.
my more controlled answer is that if we are really focused on building momentum around people learning how to manage their own supports, then each and every one of us can take that as a personal challenge. And when we come in contact with people who are struggling, when we're coming in contact with people who are trapped and saying, I hate being where I'm at, we should be able to say, this is what I've done, or this is what my friends have done. I can help you get some of that knowledge. And
Cool.
you guys and your members will know it's those things that I just said before. How do I employ staff? How do I know what's the right thing to charge? How do I take control of my own money? That sort of stuff. That's my big answer.
Yeah, it's all about the lived experience.
Yeah.
That's good. Thank you for that. I mean, it's all about the lived experience and encouraging people to advocate on their own.
Yeah.
And like through the peers, through the peer support that's happening around them.
But some people can't do that by themselves.
Yeah. So that's why they need other people around who've done it before, who are in their community, who are independent, who aren't being bought off by big service providers, who are able to give them practical support. The big thing, right? I told you I've been doing this for a long time. The big thing that works is you just get alongside people in their lounge room, listen to their story, and say, this is the bit. This is the bit that I can help you with. And I know that as soon as people start to learn how to engage their own support workers, for example, even if it's just for a few hours a week, they realise just how freeing it is to be able to decide who your support worker is and not be told who your support worker is. That stuff's really liberating for people who've been stuck in institutional group-owned settings.
Well said, Peter. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, we can't agree more.
Final question. Thank you, David. How can grassroots advocacy, community organizing, and engagement with policymakers be utilized to uphold the rights of individuals with disabilities in the context of our own and living support?
Okay, first thing is nothing about us without us. And I'm shouting that loud and clear and saying, you don't get to decide what happens in our lives, Mr. Politician and Mr. Bureaucrat, unless we're there and you're discussing it with us. And to keep on saying that over and over again. So the nothing about us without us applies as much today as it did back in the 70s and 80s when I didn't have grey hair. And then right now, we've been promised that any changes to the scheme will be designed with people with disabilities. And we have to be saying, we expect you to do that. And if you don't do it, we will make a big noise about it. And I'm by and by co-design, I mean that everybody, including those people who usually don't get a voice, the people who can't talk, the people who use communication devices so that their voice doesn't get heard. I think those people need to be involved alongside their peers, because I know that when you do that, you get a really different perspective about what disability support should look like. So I think that's really important right now, to be insisting on the co-design work. What was the other one? Yeah. And I guess my final comment would be that insisting that any support that the NDIA is putting in place must conform to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And as I think David pointed out before, we need to be clear about what the interpretation of those articles in the convention is, so that they don't get bastardized and distorted to the way that the politicians and the bureaucrats want.
Thank you very much for that, Peter. I guess, look, thank you very much for, sharing your insight and fleshing out the NDIS reform bill
So,
and its
so
implications it has on, people with disabilities.
in conclusion, what do you recommend us to do to get this fully not gone through? Can we reverse it?
I think right now, if you can encourage your members to be communicating to the minister, communicating to their local politicians, that you have big concerns about this bill,
Yeah.
and telling that from your personal perspective. Right now, as we're debating the bill, that's one of the most constructive things you can do, because the bill is still before Parliament. There's still more debate in the House of Representatives. If it gets through the House of Representatives, it will go to the Senate, and we need those senators to hear loud and clear that this bill is no good, and it needs to be withdrawn, and any replacement needs to be co-designed with people with disabilities.
Okay, so members of Parliament, we become.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And again,
David.
I think, if I remember correctly, every Australian Counts released some information about how to contact parliamentarians. I know Jordan Steele-John's office put out a list of the key parliamentarians to contact as well. So there's that stuff as well.
We should put that up on our on the CripChat website.
No, we'll get on to that. So just a bunch of resources people can look into for more information and to keep up to date with what's happening. Just a call to action for our viewers out there to stay informed, engaged, and proactive in advocating for human rights protections in the NDIS reform bill. Concerning home and living arrangements. I would like to thank Peter once again for being on CripChat, for sharing his insights into the NDIS reform bill. Thank you very much, Peter.
No problem. It's
Thanks,
good to meet
Peter.
you all. Yep, thanks.
And
You too, Peter.
it'll be good.
And for our viewers out there,
It'll be good to have you back on if we ever need you again.
Sure. Okay.
most definitely. You're always welcome to come back.
Righto. Good day. I'll see you then.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep. Bye.
Goodbye for now.
See ya.
Yeah.
Bye.